Welcome to the poetry vlog. Today I have special guest in from out of town, Casandra Lopez. Before we jump in, I want to give you a couple of quick updates and a couple quick requests. So first of all, we have a newsletter now, and the newsletter is less like, hey, look what's happening on the vlog, because you can find that everywhere for the vlog, as it's going to be updates for what's happening for our vlog guests. Right? So then you'll get to purchase their books if you're interested in them. You can kind of hear if they got a new dog. You can send in your own updates if you've been following along, and we'll create community that way. The other updates are I've merged the Instagram at the poetry vlog with my Instagram because I don't like doing social media, so that just makes my job easier. So you'll find it at Chelsea_Grimmer. And then, as always, this is going to be available as a podcast edition. So you can check out the podcast at anchor.fm/thepoetryvlog, and I'll give you all the links in the description. Vice versa, if you're listening to the podcast version of this, I know I always say it, but you should check out the YouTube channel because it has a ton of additional content that you can only get through visuals, especially if sometimes you find the terminology a little bit inaccessible, or you hear a reference and you're like, well, how do I look that up? All of it pops up in the visuals here. And what else? Oh yes, Cassandra's an amazing reader. I actually realized by accident while we were warming up that I've seen her read before and got her chapbook and kind of fangirled a little bit. And she was like, who are you? And then she brought in the full book today. I was like, wait, that's the same book. And it registered. So you can catch Cassandra reading for 4 additional little like blips over on the podcast version. So if you really love today's chat, just go to the podcast and you'll hear 4 different readings from her as well. All right, I think that's all the updates. Thanks for tolerating my run through of them. Cassandra, will you introduce yourself and tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about you?
Sure. My name is Cassandra. I'm originally from Southern California. I am a Chicana and California Indian writer and educator, and I currently teach and live in Bellingham, and I teach at Northwest Indian College.
Perfect, thank you. And to start our episode off, I'm going to give you an overview. She's going to read some of her own work, and then you want to talk about the ethics of trauma narratives, especially when it's not your own. If I'm correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm like, am I messing it up? And then, really exciting, she's going to talk a little bit about repairing relations and carrying like history and family through cars and car remodeling, which I'm from the Detroit area. My family's a car family, so I was like, ooh, I'm really excited for this. So that's the plan for today. Cassandra, will you start us off by reading from your book?
Sure. When I was a young girl, Mother once told me a story. In this story, a mother throws herself on to her son's coffin, not wanting him to be lowered into the ground. This mother's soul sobs the way only survivors can, a hunched rack of body draping over slick coffin. She's bones and lungs, needs to be pulled back and into arms. I find myself returning here often to this grieved need. We had no coffin for brother. Mother didn't cry into his casket. Her howls were kept hidden that day, twined sharp against muscle. Later they would break free into porcelain sink while brother's body was at the coroner's. There were papers to be filed, a body to be dissected. We tried to write this, purify this the desecrated.
We're back. You don't know this, but it had stopped recording. So we had already had a full, robust 20-minute discussion, and now we're going to try and do it in 15. The good news is this means we'll get to things we didn't get to otherwise. And extra deep thank you, Cassandra, for being willing to continue recording. All right, so a couple quick things I remember noting that I want to note again. Is the use of repetition and how that creates this kind of rhythmic pattern, especially you ended up mentioning where you have it kind of segmented off on the page as a list. and the use of like mothers and moving through these different kinships. And then erasure is basically what else we ended up talking about. So could we cover those things?
So I was inspired to write this poem basically from, observing my mother's strength, who I've always known as being a very strong person. But also this was like such a traumatic moment to lose a child, even if they're grown, and to see, actually see her as a human being, and as a woman, I think that was, and for me to see her, as I'm not a mother, and to see that grief, but, I think I was, at that time, there's a lot going on in the world. Yeah. I just was also thinking of Sabrina Fulton and like what it must be to grieve in public, and really feeling, for those parents who are going through those experiences, and there's certain expectations about, what if, how you should act, if you should cry, if you don't cry on camera, that's bad, or if you do cry, that's bad.
Especially for female bodies or female identified bodies.
Like you should be strong or not strong, or what are you doing afterwards, or was your child a good person or not, and all these things, and so that was in the back of my mind as I was writing this, and knowing that my brother, at one hand, was a human being, a complex person, but he's also a statistic. If you look at, in my other work, in other poems, I say, I note that he was the 37th homicide in San Bernardino in 2010, and to know that he's part of that history there, but he's more than that, and I kind of wanted to work a little bit through.
Sorry, it's so weird to repeat our conversation. Thanks everyone for tolerating it. But it's actually helping remember the other things I want to make sure we touch on, right? So the statistic piece, right? So something that strikes me about poetry and that I love about poetry, and I was telling Cassandra that we went to this digital humanities thing, which actually inspired the blog as a sidebar. Patrick and I went, and I was so bored because we took this like computational literacy class where we would learn how to quantify literature. And I was like, there has to be more to the digital world, like quantifying things, not that numbers are bad per se, but they can also strip things of their history and their richness and what they can add to our lives in terms of its value. And that's a lot of what I find really powerful creative art does. And every question I'd ask them about it when it came to poetry, I'd be like, well, I study contemporary poetry, so how would you do this for a poet? Right? How would you do this for poetry? They had no clue. They were just like, like, I don't know, sorry, poetry's weird. Moving on. But that made me it honed in for me. Part of what I love about poetry is what it deeply resists is quantification, right? You can't reduce it to a statistic, and it insists on almost the opposite. Like if you're going to use numbers, right? So iambic pentameter, right? Or talking about statistics in the poem, you're actually using it against the idea of glossing something as a statistic. You're developing a sort of richness to it.
That's some of a lot, the original impetus is very emotional, right? It's very, but I think especially in my later work, that research element adds this other layer to it, where if it's just a newspaper article, you don't get that, that's one thing, or if it's the data, that's one thing. But I think kind of being able to fuse that and integrate that can really, add another depth to it.
And then the other part about the poem is I really loved your language play of right and right. So if you're listening to the podcast, in the poem, you have right, R-I-G-H-T, and right, W-R-I-T-E. And if you're reviewing it, you saw the poem come up. And it was particularly striking to me in terms of the content we talked about you wanting to talk about, right? Which is how do you write trauma narratives, and what are the ethics of that? What do you do about erasure? What about when it's not from your perspective? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so in particular, with my brother's death, there was a sort of spiritual element that involved the healing of his body after his death. And so that's what I'm referring to as the rite, like a ritual, right? But then there was also, and I talk about the coroner, right? So the state is actually impeding some of that, what you want the natural, or what you want sort of to happen, and trying to get that, trying to get into the process of that healing. And because of the nature of his death, the state needs to do this thing, right? And there's these things that need to be done, and the body has to be dissected and examined, and that is again another, it's taking a brown body and doing something to it, but it also must be done as well. And so there is that, and feeling like I needed to write about that in order so that he's not just statistics, and like, as being, I would say, maybe there's not a huge amount of writers in my family, or I am the person, I was the person who wrote his obituary and whatnot, and so that being my responsibility, and so feeling a sister responsibility to that, and so there is that aspect where, and then also like I was very careful, I think, about what I wanted to, what I'm open to sharing and revealing about that spiritual aspect, wanting privacy from my family, but also wanting to say, like, hey, here we are, and this is what we're going through. So trying to find that balance there.
We talked about pornography in the sense of like poverty and trauma, right? And how oftentimes, like, indigenous, for instance, lives are represented as traumatic and traumatic only, and it gets kind of reproduced in this very consumable way that recommits the trauma. Like, it's incredibly violent. And something that's really rich in your poetry, and that we also talk about, is how they're also love letters, and they're also joy, and they're sparking these different connections out of that. Can you speak a little more to that?
So I tell everybody that, because I realize that it may, like, if I could do a reading and I'm reading for, extended amount of time, or if someone, I wouldn't recommend reading this whole book all in one sitting. I would not do that, because it can feel overwhelming. It can feel a lot. But if, you are going to read it, I tell people, keep in mind, I consider them all love poems. Like, I'm writing from a place of love. Yes, I'm grieving, and yes, I may be, describing some violence. But it's from a place of love, and I'm writing to my brother. Most of them the yous are to my brother, in order to, like, extend the conversation that we could not have, because of this violence. And so, I think, if you keep that in mind, and, I didn't think about it too much, because I was really just while I was writing it, very much, in that place where an urgency that I needed to do that. But afterwards, I did think about, like, if maybe this may be taken, as sort of like trauma porn, where we're some, that's not my intention. But I would hope that people would be able to see that there's also joy here. There is also, little bits, like, I write about our childhood memories, and some of them were very, happy memories, right? And so I think, like, I hope that people also can, like, find those moments as well, so we kind of see, like, the complexity of it.
The other piece I wanted to ask about is this sort of queer kinship. Like, so something else we discussed in preparation and earlier for today is how you have found that even though the poems were written for your brother, in reading them at different events, you've created these different types of, like, friendships and coalitions and communities, and kind of like a kinship. And then there's the literal, like, blood kinship in the book as well.
And so, like, I'm very much, I think of this as a family book. It is about my own grief, but very much a part of that is writing about a collective grief, a family grief. Like, I know my mother, there was times for her after my brother passed away, where it was hard for her to go out into the world. I think like the first places she went is like with people, is that those who've had already like had a similar experience and had suffered a loss. She felt like comfortable that they would know like, oh, you know, she's going through something. And then we're all kind of here. And so like I think it's very much like in the like those like in the real world, but also in the poetry, like that those connections can develop as well.
And something else about poetry that comes through in your book especially is how it allows you to have like those kind of very embodied and imagistic ways of moving through what happened without having to force it into like a nonfiction argument essentially, right? Or having to like reflect on it in a way that's legible to the reader and transparent, or create like a linear fictional narrative with clear point A to point B to point C character development.
And I think that's the great thing about poetry. So like in fiction, it felt too removed. Like, oh, I'm going to be writing through this character, and really, I mean, at the time, it was like, oh, fiction doesn't matter. I don't believe that. It's just that at that time, like it didn't have the same like burning urgency to write fiction because it was felt masked. There's a couple of poems about growing up with my mother sewing, and you know, I usually think about that as sort of sparking my creativity, like being around that sort of creative energy. But really, when I thought about it, it was like actually my father, his creativity also sparked my own practice. And if you would ask my father, oh, are you artistic? He would say no. I don't think, but he, you know, growing up, he like as a, I wouldn't say a hobby, you know, but, you know, what he would do, he would restore cars, and that was also a big part of my family. My brother was into, you know, car customization, lowriders, like custom cars, airbags, so like like all of that, you know.
I come from a car family. I grew up watching like my dad and my uncle and my grandpa. My grandpa worked at a gas station. And I come from a car family,
and so
I know maybe more than I should about what you're referring to.
And there was always all these cars they were always getting these cars that were like in disrepair, right? But they were able to see something in them, right? That. And also one thing too is like those type of cars are cheaper to buy, and then you can work on them, although it takes a lot of investment. And so my father specialized in, you know, painting and body work, and he was, you know, very detail oriented, whereas my brother also, you know, very much enjoyed cars, but like would want to skip steps. And my dad was like, no, this has to be done in a certain way, and you know, and would be able to create, you know, these beautiful paint jobs. And so I, you know, when I think like he was very creative in his own way, but I don't think that type of artistic work gets, you know, is not in the sort of larger art world, or is not really, you know, it's not seen as like a high art. Although I think now it's kind of changing. There's like lowriders in museums.
So there's the Woodward Dream Cruise.
So there is some appreciation now, I think, for it, but for a long time I don't think there has been. In car culture, it can be segregated. Like it can be very in terms of the types of cars, culture, race, gender, you know, where
class.
Yes, and so, you know, really the idea was to bring in all types. Because that's the type of person my brother was. And so that was like, I felt like that was the great thing of it, is that we can celebrate, you know, bicycles, we can celebrate newer modified cars, lowriders, you know, American or European cars, you know, we can celebrate the beauty of it all, and like, and the work and the work that goes into all of that,
and the craftsmanship. I think this relates for reading, for people who watch. Sometimes I get a lot asked about readings, like what else can I read on this, I think Barbara Christian and Kara Keeling, I'll link to them, both have essays on how oftentimes as arts are seen as embodied practices that often carry with them a lot of like race, gender, class, ethnicity, and so forth. They're categorized as low art because it's not seen as like intellectual labor, but that's where a lot of like creative world building and intellectual labor is actually done. Like something that strikes me in your poetry is how you both are seeking out and creating these connections. Or like at the car show, there's this like, it doesn't matter if you're bringing in your like Dodge versus Chevy, right? Which I know too well. but it's not that you're erasing differences, you know, like it's not like so long as we're all the same. It's like you can still have these private and public differences that are important. Right?
Yeah.
That have to be celebrated with that. It sounds really cheesy as a car
we
metaphor,
also had my parents had a award that was for like a car in progress.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. Like, we need the poetry version of that. We need the like poetry book in progress award.
We're acknowledging that it's not there yet, but there's something about this.
I love that, actually.
This car that, you know, is, we can imagine that it's going to be great.
Yeah. I know it sounds really cliche, but I feel like poetry desperately needs that award.
Yeah.
Like really desperately, actually, for political reasons as well as like practical reasons.
And there's a writer, Dylan Miner, artist as well, who that writes about, but looking at like Chicanx car culture and art. That'd be a great also to link to his work as well. Perfect. As it's a part of the culture, and it's I mean I don't think I really appreciated it until I moved away. Yep. and I think when you move away, you're able to see things in it from a different perspective of it, and I think, you know, sometimes, you know, this book is very much grounded in Southern California, but it's also talking about New Mexico and our travel, and so I think that's an important part, like this migratory. But I think part of like I was able to write this book, I was writing it from New Mexico. A lot of it, or writing it. I think I wrote some of it when I was in Seattle, living in Seattle too. So, and I was kind of constantly going back and forth, but being able to be away a little bit. Yeah.
One of my chapbooks is about the Motor City. And the sort of weird relationship between water and car culture and like lake culture and car culture in Michigan with like the sharp segregations between the different parts of Southeast Michigan. Because Southeast Michigan is diverse, but it's very segregated, right? Like you have Dearborn, which has like the largest Arab Muslim population in the country. But then you have Detroit, which is like 98% Black African American. And then you have Grand Rapids, which has like a huge like Latinx culture, like but it's very segregated and weird. And car culture is the thing that kind of like traverses all of it in both violent ways and in like celebratory ways. And I couldn't write about it till I moved to Portland. And I was like, oh, I see now. That's not everywhere.
You know? You're able to like being on a plane.
Exactly. All right, we are so out of time after all that. Thank you so much, everyone, for following along with us today. Thank you again, Casandra. That was super generous. So many levels of disorganization, and she was incredible about it. Tune into the flash briefings. I'm actually going to ask you if you don't mind reading the card poem actually in it, so I can reference people to that, so you can hear her read it there. Follow the links below. What's your website?
Casandra Lopez.
Perfect. The .com matters. I'm learning. People have a lot of add-ons on the end. And visit thepoetryblog.com as your hub for all of the things. The social media, more links to the content from today, the podcast version, yada, yada, yada. In the comments below, I have a particular prompt for you. Have you ever written a poem about where you're from after you've left? And if so, how did it change the way that you saw where you're from? Like, what was it effect on you after you wrote the poem, to be like really clear versus before writing the poem? If you haven't, then writing prompt for you. If you haven't moved ever, then you're a mysterious creature. All right. Anything else we should cover? No. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you again, Casandra. And I hope you all have a lovely day. Bye. Season 3 is brought to you with support from the Simpson Center,
Also, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation.
the Jackstraw Cultural Center,
And you, the students. Thank you so much.
and specifically 7 students that are doing all of this behind the scenes production. Find out more at thepoetryblog.com.
You're all saints. Thank you so much.
Exactly. Or you're like the anti-saint, depending on your
Same thing.
preference.
Yeah.